Our jobs are so front and center in dealing with people. The most, I think, rewarding part of being a people person for a company is when you can see the success that the people on your team have, or someone accomplishes something in their career they never thought they would be able to do.
Welcome to API Futures, a podcast by Ascend where we empower global leaders of tomorrow. Here's our guest host for this episode.
Welcome to API Futures. I'm Jyoti Chopra, Chief People, Inclusion, Sustainability Officer for MGM Resorts International. Incredibly excited to be here today with a fellow people talent leader. And so let me welcome Lisa Chang, Executive Vice President and Global Chief People Officer for the Coca-Cola Corporation. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you, Jyoti. It's great to be here.
Likewise. I'm so excited to have the conversation with you today. It's a treat to be sitting down with someone that has a very similar job at another company. But let's maybe start out by going back in time and going down the road at the beginning of our careers, and perhaps sharing stories about our very first jobs. Let's have you go first.
So my first job that wasn't really a big job was I was a babysitter. So that probably taught me a little bit about dealing with people. But my first real paying job was I was actually working for Toys R Us, a toy store, helping to recruit talent to work in the stores.
My first job was actually at the United Nations. Very unexpectedly, I had come out to New York on a visit over the course of the summer. I was getting ready to go off to university to study law and came out for a summer trip. And a very good friend of mine worked for the United Nations, and she told me about these 3-month short-term assignments that they had from September to December covering the UN General Assembly. And the next thing I knew, I got taken over to the recruitment office on First Avenue and 44th Street in Manhattan, sat some exams, and got called in for an interview and got hired the next day for a 3-month assignment. So I promptly deferred my university admission back in England and said, sign me up, and got a UN badge and ID and worked in the UN Secretariat building where all the flags are, on the 3rd floor, in the press media office. So this is where they accredited all the journalists that were coming in to cover the UN General Assembly. And it was an unbelievable experience being surrounded by people from, at that time, more than 170 member nations. Everything was concurrently translated into 6 languages, both printed as well as in the convening rooms. And it was my first job, my first exposure to people and cultures from around the world. And I loved it. And I said, I have to find a way to stay on. And so New York became home and America became home. And that's where I came of age. And I did get a permanent job over time there. And that was my first job.
That's amazing. Amazing.
As you look back on your career, Lisa, did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up? How far back when you look back, do you sort of think that you sort of discerned, I want to be a people person, I want to care for people?
I'm not sure that I've ever really thought about if there was a trigger that put me in that. I mean, I followed the family life plan for a while and did pre-med like, every good Asian daughter would do, and quickly determined that probably wasn't the right path for me. But I think, going back to, I'm a middle child, I'm an only daughter. I think the humanity side of caring for people, always being curious, being the arbitrator, serving as the middle child, and always wanting to make sure that people felt comfortable. I was always the person when, my parents or family would have dinner guests. Somehow I always ended up taking care of the people that, nobody would talk to. So I think it probably was at some point in my college career when I decided not to do medicine, that I felt like I wanted to be in business, but I wanted to make sure that I wasn't in a corner crunching numbers, but that I had a role that gave me an opportunity to really interact with people on a deeper level, not just, again, a transactional level. So that's probably how I landed in this space.
It's interesting how family backgrounds shape experiences and ultimately life decisions. I'm also one of 3 siblings. I'm the oldest of 3 girls, and so I was the one that had to be the role model, that had to sort of live up to all the standards and expectations of first-generation Asian immigrant parents who had come into the UK. And I suppose I was very pioneering as I look back. Like my father, moved to another country across oceans to start a new life. Never expected to end up in America and in New York City, but I felt a sense of belonging when I arrived. And America became home for me in New York City. And after I sort of settled into a job at the UN and was able to support myself, I went back to school and ended up finishing my undergraduate degree at New York University, majored in journalism. And it was a great backdrop and foundation, I think, for the career path that I went on. But I think for me, where my work got catalyzed were 4 years that I spent at UNICEF, the UN's agency for children, for women and children. And I was there in the 1990s during the Rwandan conflict, during the Bosnian War, and got to sort of see through my work the inequalities around the world, where, for example, women and girls were used as weapons of rape, as weapons of war, and dealing with lack of education and access to just basic human rights for children. And I think that's where it sort of resolved for me that whatever I do, I want to make a difference. And for me, it had to be about the larger picture of alleviating inequalities and somehow finding a way to make a difference and to have an impact. And that carried forward for me. And so I left the UN very deliberately after some time and ventured into the private sector and ended up on Wall Street. But a story to be continued. But those years, I think, for me at the UN really catalyzed work around people and having an impact. And speaking of people, Lisa, do you think of yourself or consider yourself a people person?
Well, it's funny you should ask that, because you would think I would be. And I would say, of course, I am, certainly in the work that I do. But interestingly, I am an introvert. And so that often surprises people because our jobs are so front and center in dealing with people. But I think for me, I like to go in short spurts deep versus being on all the time in large groups. So definitely care about people on a lot of different levels. And the most, I think, rewarding part of being a people person for a company is when you can see the success that the people on your team have, or someone accomplishes something in their career they never thought they would be able to do, or someone who receives some feedback turns it around into a really positive momentum. And so those are the things that give me the rewards when I deal with the people.
That's wonderful to hear, and what a great story. And it's interesting how similar we actually are. I was an I, but I've learned to become an E. My mother tells me that when she would come and pick me up from preschool and elementary school, I was always a little girl sitting in the corner in the back of the room by myself, incredibly shy, and would only speak when spoken to, and was very shy and very introverted growing up. But then I think through work and career and becoming an immigrant and coming to a new country, I sort of learned the importance of having to communicate and being more proactive. And I'll just share a quick story. When I joined Merrill Lynch, it was as vice president of multicultural business development. It was a marketing-facing job, and I had to be a spokesperson for the firm. And so literally on day 2 of the job, I was shipped off for media training for half a day, and then had to appear on CNBC the next day. And so I had to learn very quickly the power of public speaking and just getting on with it. But I would say I do find, like you, one of the most rewarding aspects of our work as people leaders is the difference that you can have on somebody's life and career. I remember telling a story on a conference call about why I chose to go back to school in my 40s and finish a master's and do an executive MBA program. And after that, one of my colleagues came to see me and said, after hearing your story, I've decided I'm going to go back to school and I want to do an MBA. It's something I'd always put on the back burner, but you've motivated me to go do it. And he's just finished a 2-year program and incredibly proud. And so, the ability of imparting advice and guidance and steer. And I like to think of it as helping people realize their potential. I think that's part of our job, is just helping people see the potential in themselves and then creating enabling mechanisms within an organizational construct for them to then accelerate and progress and climb.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's what's great is, we didn't have as many role models when you and I were coming up of people that looked like us, that we could have the moment of, I want to be like you. So I think what's great about organizations like Ascend and the work that we're doing is it's providing people an opportunity to see someone that has the same background, the upbringing, looks like me, has the same experiences I have, and look at what they're able to accomplish. And that, I think, is part of building that inclusive environment in organizations today. So
that's absolutely right. Ascend's work is incredible. I've seen over the years how it's grown, and what a remarkable opportunity to convene people from so many industries and sectors and create the networking and professional development opportunities. It's an organization I've been incredibly proud to be affiliated with. Let's segue into sort of the topic of relationships. And, a big part of being a people leader is cultivating, nurturing relationships and managing a complex set of stakeholders. How do you go about developing relationships? What advice would you have to those listening to our podcast around forming relationships as they work their way through their careers?
Yeah, I think I go back to a little bit to what I said at the beginning about, I like to build deep relationships with people that are in a network and serve sort of mutual benefits, if you will. So my advice has always been to surround yourself with people that you can add to their value as well as add to yours. And I always find that for one reason or another, it could be somebody completely the opposite of me, but there's so much that I can get from them and so much they can get from me. And so, I really just try to make sure that I surround myself with those folks. Also, people that can be truth tellers. We often need people that can really tell us the truth instead of telling us what we want to hear. And so that's something that I think is important, is making sure that you have a few of those folks in your network that you can really kind of call up and say, no, really, tell me, how am I doing? What do I need to do better? Or, did I show up in the right way? And then, I know we'll talk a little bit about sponsors and the difference between that and mentors, but I think it's incredibly important to build relationships with people that understand not only what you've done, what you're capable of doing, but also what your aspirations are, and how you can transfer those into other experiences, because you and I both know that a lot happens in the room when you're not there. And so having people that can speak to what Jyoti brings to the table, why she would be a good person to be considered for this role. I've not seen her do X, but I know she can do Y. So I think building relationships, again, for the mutual purpose of saying, I just need someone to advocate for me when I'm not in the room, because they know me. They know me on multiple levels. And it's not just the checklist of things that I've done, but it's really the potential that I possess.
That's right. And it's often about the room where it happens, as they say. As you think about skills and talents across a team, what do you see as some of the most important skills or talents needed to build and lead successful, diverse teams?
Yeah, you touched on this a bit, but I think it's really making sure that as a leader, you're focused on developing others and helping them be their best selves versus, trying to take the credit for being the leader of the group, right? So most important job as a leader is to build capabilities and talents in others. I think an enormous amount of emotional intelligence is involved, because you have to be able to register what's happening, who your audience is, how do you interact with different people on the team, where are they? You have to meet them where they are, so an ability to kind of throttle in that point. And I think a lot of listening and a lot of patience and investment in getting to know people beyond the surface level, because as a leader, our jobs are really to bring out the best. And so you have to get past that kind of initial facade of how I show up into how do I really think and what can I bring to the table and what's unique about what this person can bring to the team.
And just building on that, beyond sort of the workforce and the people component, there's the workplace component, i.e. the companies we work for. What's changed for you and the role that you have today at Coca-Cola?
Well, you know this as well as I do. It's been quite the journey for the last several years from a not only workplace standpoint, but an employee, a social, political standpoint. I think the biggest changes have been on the positive side, a greater emphasis, appreciation, and understanding for the role that people have in the workplace. It was always trite when people would say people are our most important asset, and then, the way companies would show up would be absolutely counter to that. But I think through the last few years, certainly through the pandemic and other things, what we realized is without people, it's really hard to have a successful business. And so I think the value of understanding why investments in people and all the things that go with it, whether it's rewards, whether it's culture, whether it's leadership, developing capabilities, all those I think have become really, really central and core, which I think is going to pay off, tenfold in the future as the need to develop capabilities accelerates. So I think that's on the positive side. I think a bit more challenging has been a lot of the way communication and social media has overtaken a lot of the company's role in building relationships with their employees. So we have definitely found that it's easy to communicate electronically, but I think what happens is people tend to hide behind that, and you don't really get to know people at the level of understanding and respecting the differences. And that's what happened during COVID. We were doing a lot of communication, and it was all done virtually and electronically, which seemed like it worked. But then what we realized is we were missing that true connection, and people were sort of talking over each other and not really connecting face-to-face and eye-to-eye. So we're really trying to bring people back together for the purposes of building that connection, the relationships, and we focus on being intentional around, we call it the 3 C's. We come together to co-create, collaborate, and celebrate. Those are the things that you need to do in person because you get so much more out of it. If you just need to do a update call or a status call or, do a quick review of something, virtual's fine. But there's nothing like being in person to bring out the best in those.
Yeah, that's a wonderful framing, particularly the co-create, in addition to collaborate, and how you've described it. It's been a similar journey for us at MGM Resorts, particularly coming through the pandemic. You know, we are a 24/7 business. We are in multiple businesses: food and beverages, restaurants, retail, hotel, gaming, entertainment, shows, and so much more. And I would say the role has changed from being administrative in some ways to far more strategic. And you're the culture carrier in many ways as a chief people officer. You have to know and understand the heartbeat of the organization, and that's really sort of having a pulse on the people. What's the sentiment? How are they feeling? What is it they need? How can we support them in so many ways? And so it's definitely changed, I think, in the post-pandemic world. We're still living with and dealing with COVID as we speak, but I think in many ways the function of a people officer is to be the vanguard of the humanity of the culture and the corporation. But let's segue into business. You're an intensely consumer product driven company. Consumer demands are changing. How's the business changed, and sort of the interface of people in the business for you?
Yeah, for us, the business is ever expanding. I think Coca-Cola has been around for 138 years, and we started with one product in one country, which was the original Coke, and then we became one product in many countries, which was the red Coke, all over the world. And so we've transitioned our business over the last several years to what we call Beverages for Life. It's a portfolio of beverages that meet the consumer where they are. So it's not, although the company is still the Coca-Cola Company, we're not just about the Coca-Cola product. We now have a dairy company, we have a coffee company, we are in juices, we do tea, we do energy, we do kind of all kinds of different beverages to try to meet the consumers where they are. Around the world, we operate in over 200 countries. The consumer preferences are changing, regulations changing, focus on sustainability, on sugar. And so we're constantly having to evolve our business to meet all the stakeholders. But at the end of the day, I think the beautiful thing about a company that has been so long sustaining like Coca-Cola is we have our purpose statement, which is to refresh the world and make a difference. And when the Refresh the World was first put out there as our purpose statement, it was the literal refresh the world from a palate standpoint. And now we look at refreshing the world as being much broader. It's emotional, it's social, it's how do we bring connection to people? And we see our products as a proxy for a reason to come together and to build those communities. And I tell our folks all the time that, Coca-Cola is about community. And so, yes, we're a beverage product, but those products are intended to be enjoyed with others. And so that's something that we really try to continue to focus on, is continuing to promote that environment and promote the diversity of the world. We were, one of the original ads that we had was, I'd like to buy the world a Coke. Yes, and that was a very iconic, diverse commercial in its day, and we still try to live up to that.
And a beautiful one. Well, this has been such an inspiring and uplifting conversation, and I have one last question for both of us. As you look back, what's a piece of advice you would give your younger self?
I really have two pieces of advice that I've learned that I not only would give my younger self, but I have given to my daughter that's now in the working world. And the first is to not be afraid to make mistakes. I think, as an attribute, again, of really sound Asian children, it's not good to make mistakes. But I think that some of the biggest growth moments in my career came when something didn't work out the way I had intended it for it to work out. and I learned something I didn't know, and I wouldn't have known had I not tried it. So I think it's important to not be afraid to make mistakes, but instead to learn from them and to adjust course and figure out what you can do next. And so don't be afraid to take that leap. And then I think the second piece of advice I would give my younger self is also don't be afraid to ask for help. I think, again, we feel like oftentimes asking for help can be a sign of weakness. I don't want to show that I don't know what I'm doing and I have to prove that I can do this on my own. And it's actually quite the opposite. Being part of a team, being part of a company, working together is about collaboration and bringing the best of people together. And so it's not only not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of great collaboration. You get to a better place if you can work with other people.
It's very insightful and incredibly helpful advice that I'm sure those listening can really learn from. Not to be afraid of mistakes or to ask for help. Very, very, very well put. I think in my case, a piece of advice I got when I was probably, I don't know, I'd say about 20 years into my career, was from one of my immediate managers. And I'd simply asked him a question of, what does it take to be successful here? And he said, Jyoti, I'll give you just one piece of advice. Invest in the success of others. And it was something I took to heart, and I've sort of since adopted it as a mantra and a personal philosophy that I've carried with me wherever I go, whether it's in my nonprofit work or my professional work or community work or social work or even in family work. But it's about thinking about how you can help others be successful and investing in that. And it's enormously satisfying, and I learn through each and every one of my experiences. I wish I had heard that at the beginning of my career, but it's never too late. And so that was a teaching and a learning moment for me. Well, Lisa, this has been fantastic and a really special opportunity, people to people, and wishing you much continued success in your leadership journey. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to API Futures, presented by Ascend, where we empower global leaders of tomorrow. Subscribe to API Futures on Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple.